US President Joe Biden held talks with House Speaker Kevin McCarthy on Monday to avert a looming debt default in the country.
Yes, the high-stakes White House meeting came after Biden returned from a trip to Asia early in a bid to hammer out a deal ahead of the US Treasury's 1st of June cutoff date for Congress to authorize more borrowing. Biden and McCarthy have struggled to make progress on a deal.
The US House Speaker has said that the source of stalemate between the Democrats and the Republicans, it's always been spending. However, despite recognizing the differences, McCarthy said that the tone here had changed.
I thank the President for spending time. We had a very productive conversation yesterday, even though he was coming back from the G7 meeting. We do have disagreements. I think we have a 50-year average. We're having more revenue at any time coming in. But I think we both agree that we need to change the trajectory, that our debt is too large.
Now, Biden also said that he was optimistic that they could make some progress and asserted on how they would take every day, they would in fact talk every day to each other to try and find out a way to get this done. However, as of now, no deal has been reached.
Okay, well, I'm glad the Speaker's here today. We're optimistic we may be able to make some progress because we both agreed default's not really on the table. We've got to get something done here. And the consequence of failing to pay our bills would be that American people would have a real kick in their economic well-being. As a matter of fact, the rest of the world would too. And so we also agree we need to reduce the deficit.
The White House aides met with Republican negotiators in the Capitol Hill for 2 hours on Monday, and early indications were that the talks between McCarthy and Biden had gone well. The debt ceiling is a spending limit set by the Congress which determines how much money the government can borrow. Failure to raise it beyond the current cap of roughly $31.4 trillion by June could result in the U.S. defaulting on its debt. So how does this debt ceiling deadlock impact you and me? Here's him with the explainer.
Thank you so much, Rohit. Let's just tell you what this debt ceiling battle means for your money. Now, default would mean that those owed money by the federal government, they will not get it. These parties include holders of Treasury securities, Social Security recipients, members of the military, and Medicare providers as well. So neglecting to pay bondholders, that could result in credit rating companies' treasury debt as well, further sending shockwaves across global financial systems here. That in turn would result in higher borrowing costs for the government and everyday businesses, pushing the US economy into a recession here. This in turn would result in higher borrowing costs, as I mentioned. Now let's also try and understand how can you prepare yourself against the default here. For starters, you can have a diversified portfolio of stocks and bonds here. That could help in this scenario. You could also consider taking cash out of the markets for your short-term goals. You could also consider the time horizon for your financial goals here. Some investors, they also recommend turning to gold as a hedge against a potential default. Now, to understand this better, we earlier spoke to our correspondent Susan Tehrani on what happens once a deal is reached. Let's just listen in.
McCarthy told reporters at the Capitol on Monday that a deal must be reached this week in order to have enough time for the legislation to pass Congress. He even hinted that he's willing to cancel an upcoming House recess if no deal is reached. But once a deal is reached, it will likely take a few days for it to make its rounds in Congress. McCarthy said that he would give lawmakers 72 hours to review the agreement, and it is very likely that lawmakers would want to make amendments to any agreement or deal that is reached.
And here's Susan Tehrani again on whether there is a backup measure in case there is no deal.
So despite the optimism expressed by President Joe Biden and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy on Monday afternoon, given the uncertainty of negotiations, lawmakers are scrambling to find an alternative and a solution to avoid a default. Nearly all House Democrats have signed what is called a discharge position, which is a long-shot parliamentary maneuver that requires 218 signatures. Not only all Democrats must sign on, but 5 GOPs must also sign on to that. Progressives in the Senate are also pushing for President Biden to use the 14th Amendment of the Constitution to unilaterally act without Congress. That is very unlikely, and even if that does happen, it will face challenges in court. Lawmakers could also pursue a short-term increase of the debt ceiling to give negotiators enough time to reach a deal.